Okay, here we are. Time for the third part of the story, A Christmas Most Unusual, a Middle Falls time travel story. You'd think I'd be able to get that part out without messing up, wouldn't you? But you'd be wrong. All right, let's get started. I'm going to go back just about a paragraph or so and start us from there. Katie shut off the water, lifted her feet a few inches, and let the water run off them. She scooted herself around so she was able to put her feet on the towel. Isaac had steeled himself to not say anything, no matter what he saw, but he couldn't stop himself. Oh, honey, he said. His hand went to his mouth before he caught himself. That was all it took for the dam to burst. Katie dropped her chin to her chest and sobbed. She let loose of everything she had been carrying with her, shame and fear and loneliness, everything. Isaac was not a touchy-feely person, but he knew what to do. He knelt beside her and held her while she cried. When he sensed a break in the storm, he sniffed, blinked, and said, "Okay, that was a good first step. Now let's get you fixed up." Katie didn't have a wound on her feet. She had many. The boots must have been ill-fitting, and she had pushed on, walking through pain until she had formed blisters. The blisters had popped and eventually become open, seeping wounds on both feet. Her heels, the sides of her feet, her toes were all angry and halfway to already being infected. You know, this looks a lot worse than it is, Isaac said. I'll have you patched up in no time. He sounded much more confident than he felt, but he went to work. He patted each wound carefully dry, then applied a bit of hydrogen peroxide, watching it bubble. Then he patted the residue of that away and applied Bactine. Finally, he opened several of the capsules of golden seal and emptied them onto the saucer he had brought with them. He mixed in a few drops of water and made a paste, then applied that to the bandages and band-aids he had set out. "What's that?" Katie asked. She didn't sound suspicious, just genuinely curious. "Golden seal. It's got wonderful healing properties. It'll draw out any infection that might have started. I know it looks ugly, but it's the best thing I know. I learned a lot about how to treat wounds from the U.S. Army, but even more from my grandmother. She taught me about golden seal." It took him quite some time, but eventually he had all the open sores on her feet bandaged up. "Stay here," he said, then hurried down to his bedroom. He returned with some of his own soft, comfortable socks and a pair of Sandra's slippers. "We're going to need to find you something that fits you better, or we'll be right back here again." Katie just nodded. She didn't say, "That's not an option," or "I don't have any money at all." She just nodded her agreement with the truth of that statement. "Okay," Isaac said, understanding. "Let's try to keep you off your feet for a bit, okay?" "Sure," Katie said, understanding. "No problem." This time, a bit of the irony did touch her voice. It was obvious that she slept out in the open. Taking a few days to rest and relax probably wasn't on the agenda. "Let's go see what they've got going in the kitchen," Isaac said. Before he got there, he was distracted by a small hubbub in the living room. Things had been happening there in the time he was gone. Whether the remote and connecting the VCR was tricky or not, someone had gotten it working. It's a Wonderful Life was playing. So much progress had been made on putting the jigsaw puzzle together that Isaac blinked when he looked at it. It was perhaps one-third completed. The big change was that someone, Miles, Isaac had guessed, had dragged Katie's Charlie Brown Christmas tree inside and leaned it against the corner of the living room. Miles and Joey were working together to string lights around it. He almost asked where the lights had come from, but remembered his failed attempt at decorating the window outside. The tree would not have appeared in House Beautiful, but he had to admit it did make it feel a little more like Christmas. "Who's the puzzle genius?" Isaac asked. Joey pointed at Miles. "He's really smart. Really smart." "I know a lot of smart people, but I don't know anyone who can work a puzzle like that. You should see him do a Rubik's Cube." Joey made a gesture like a rocket ship taking off, and Isaac looked at Miles, struggling to wrap lights around the limbs of a tree, and reminded himself again that appearances could be deceiving. Katie had come out of the bathroom. She was wearing the socks and slippers. She was still walking gingerly, but wasn't limping like before. Would you like some coffee? Isaac asked. He didn't really wait for an answer, but led her into the kitchen and sat her down beside Eleanor. The kitchen had changed in his time away as well. Eleanor and the two sisters had turned the kitchen into a whirlwind of activity. The oven was on, and it smelled like something delicious was inside. There were two pots boiling on the stove, and Eleanor was peeling a cucumber and cutting it up for a salad. Katie needs to stay off her feet for a while, Isaac said simply. Eleanor patted the chair beside her and said, "Come sit with me. You can still help with the salad if you'd like." Isaac noted that all three women had poured themselves coffee, so he did the same for Katie. "Cream and sugar?" "Yes, please." It was another in a series of unusual events for Isaac to figure out how to make someone else's coffee, since he typically didn't even make his own. He decided to make it the same way Sandra had reminded him to make his own. When he poured the coffee into a thick ceramic mug, he added a dollop of cream, 2 teaspoons of sugar, and set it in front of Katie, who was slicing tomatoes on a cutting board. Isaac realized that he had neglected to get the rest of his guests any refreshments, so he went back to the living room. The Christmas tree was decorated as it was going to be anyway, since the men hadn't had access to tinsel or ornaments. Bartholomew sat in what Isaac thought of as his chair, watching the movie, while Joey and Miles hovered over the jigsaw puzzle. Joey appeared to be working the puzzle like a normal person, taking his time, trying different pieces, rejecting some, fitting others perfectly. Miles was another case altogether. His hands flew across the pieces as though he had eyes in his fingers. He constantly plucked a piece up and put it in place. If he ever made a mistake, Isaac never saw it. The remarkable thing was, he seemed to be quoting the dialogue from It's a Wonderful Life as he did so. Isaac smiled and shook his head, wondering what he would be doing at that very moment if he hadn't noticed Katie dragging her tree down the sidewalk. He knew he probably would have made himself another meatloaf sandwich and would be asleep in his chair again. He knew this was better. Isaac raised his voice a bit to be heard over the movie and the sound of Miles murmuring along. "Would anyone want a cup of coffee?" Silence for several seconds. "No? Do you have tea?" Bartholomew asked. "Or hot chocolate?" Joey asked. "I can't drink coffee," Miles said. "Okay," Isaac said, suddenly feeling like a waitress with an order pad. "Bartholomew, would you like cream and sugar in your tea?" "If the tea is adequate, I do not need either." Isaac honestly wasn't sure if the tea tucked away in the cupboard was adequate or not, but he decided to risk it. "Got it. I'll make you some hot chocolate, Joey. Is there anything I can get you, Miles? Do you have Big Red soda?" Isaac had never heard of it, let alone had it in his house. "No, I'm sorry, I'm out." "Just some water then, please," Miles said. He went back to mumbling the words of dialogue to the movie and putting the puzzle together faster than should have been humanly possible. Isaac went back to the kitchen and put a kettle on to boil for the tea, then poured some milk into a pan and turned the burner on high. "Oh my, men," Bethany said. "You can't put milk on to heat that hot. You'll scorch it." "Really? I didn't know." Bethany turned the heat down to just below medium and said, "What are you making?" Joey wanted hot chocolate, Bartholomew wanted tea, and Miles just wanted water. "You scoot out of here. We'll take care of the men." Isaac almost said, "I'm a man," but didn't. Instead, he made himself a cup of coffee and sat down at his normal place at the table. "What are we having?" "An embarrassment of riches," Eleanor said. "Enough food to feed us 4 times over. There will be leftovers for everyone." Isaac looked at Sylvia and said, "Are you making a pie?" Of course. What is Christmas dinner without some dessert? If she had asked Isaac if he had the necessary makings for a pie, he would have guessed that he did not. She had not, however, asked. She had simply done. "Come on now. Scoot," Sylvia said. "No, wait. There's one more thing. This table only seats 4, 6 if we really squeeze in. Do you have a bigger table?" Isaac nodded. "We have a big table in the dining room. We can all fit around it." He almost bit his tongue thinking of how piled that table had become over the years. There were piles of stuff that probably needed to be discarded, but instead found a flat surface and stuck there, becoming more and more of the landscape of the room. I'll go get it ready. He went to the dining room and was momentarily overwhelmed by the task at hand. He had no idea where to start. Do you have any boxes? It was Katie, who was apparently terrible at following directions and staying off her feet. On the back porch. I'll go get a couple. Isaac slipped through the kitchen as unobtrusively as possible, not wanting to be reprimanded to scoot again. He found the pile of apple boxes in one corner. He had no idea why they were there, but knew that their raison d'etre had at last arrived. He grabbed two, then thought better and added a third. When he got back to the dining room, Katie had been busy. She saw the boxes and said, "Good. Now, we don't want to upset Sandra when she comes home, so let's divide the table into 3 sections. When dinner is done and the dishes are cleared, we can put everything back just as it was." Many hands make light work. Even 4 hands can make the unmanageable seem not too bad. Katie started clearing and boxing up at one end, Isaac at the other. By the time they met in the middle, the boxes were heaped high, but the table was clear. Katie ran a finger along the tabletop. "If you can carry the boxes somewhere, I'll get this cleaned up and ready to shine." Her eyes twinkled a little and said, "This is your table's big moment. It has to look good." Isaac nodded and carried boxes away to his bedroom. By the time he was done with that, the table did indeed shine. He had forgotten what a fine piece of furniture it was. Katie and Bethany appeared carrying plates and glasses, silverware, and napkins. Isaac hadn't seen some of what they had carried in years, and a few of the things he wouldn't have recognized as his own. The 2 women went around the table, putting complete place settings at 8 spots. When Isaac thought they were done, Bethany produced 2 crystal candlestick holders and white tapered candles. He was almost certain he didn't have any candlesticks or crystal in the house, but there they were. Bethany reached out and touched Isaac. "You go get the boys now while we bring the food in." All was sedate in the living room. The puzzle on the card table was complete. A few hours earlier, Isaac would have said that was near impossible, but he was learning to accept the miraculous on this Christmas. The movie had reached its climax, with George Bailey holding Zuzu, surrounded by people who loved him, the crisis over. Zuzu and Miles repeated her famous line about an angel, undoubtedly Clarence this time, getting its wings when Sylvia and Bethany appeared together. They had both found aprons and looked both slightly overheated and very pleased with themselves. "Come on, boys, it's dinner time." In the dining room, the candles had been lit and a vast array of food was on the table. It wasn't a traditional Christmas dinner, but it was a feast. There was lasagna. Isaac had no idea how it had made it from frozen to finished so fast. A huge salad, a steaming bowl of chicken soup, green beans cooked with bacon, cornbread, and both a green and a fruit salad. "I don't know how you did all this," Isaac said truthfully. "Old ladies know a little bit about a lot," Eleanor said. "Now sit." She seemed to be in charge of where everyone sat, putting Isaac at one head of the table and taking the other herself. On one side, Bethany and Sylvia put Bartholomew between them. On the other, Miles and Katie, the 2 thinnest people in the group, flanked Joey. "Isaac, before we dig in, will you say grace?" That stopped him cold. He couldn't imagine what to say, but everyone bowed their heads and waited for him. "Thank you for this Christmas, most unexpected, for new friends, this wonderful spread, and being together on a day when we might have all been apart." He wasn't sure what else to say, but Eleanor took care of it by saying amen, and everyone else chimed in. The next hour flew by in a happy rush of food and conversation. Each person around the table revealed something that they thought no one else knew about them. Eleanor said that she had been married when she was only 16, but that her husband had died of influenza within the year. She had never remarried. Bethany and Sylvia said they had both gone to school in a one-room schoolhouse on the plains of Minnesota, where they had both fallen for the same boy. There were so little to choose from, Sylvia said, and they both laughed. Bartholomew said that his wife was the first and last girl he had ever kissed. Isaac wanted to ask if any others had snuck in there in the middle, but the look of sincere loss on Bartholomew's face answered that question. Joey revealed that he had been an athlete and had once held the Oregon high school record for the high hurdles. Smiling, he said, "I'm not sure I could beat that time today," and everyone laughed supportively. Miles said he had once notched a perfect score on the SATs, but had been too nervous to go on to school. No one doubted either of those statements either. Katie quietly said, "I can sing." It was not a brag, but a simple declarative statement. She closed her eyes and cleared her throat and sang, "O come, all you faithful, joyful and triumphant." Every head at the table turned toward her gorgeous crystalline voice. She chose to only sing the first few verses, then stopped, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's been a long time since I've sung. I wasn't sure if I still could." "You can," everyone around the table said in unison. Katie dropped her head, and Isaac noticed a single tear fall into her lap. Mushu, who had been laying quietly on the floor watching the proceedings, jumped into her lap and snuggled against her. "What about you, Isaac?" Eleanor asked, giving Katie some space. Isaac thought that Eleanor was able to see what others could not, sightless eyes or not. "I don't know if I have anything," Isaac admitted. "You've all led such interesting lives. I've never married. The only time I moved out of Middle Falls was to join the army." He paused, then said, "But I can say that I hadn't realized what an insulated life I was living until today. I need to thank Katie for dragging that Christmas tree past my porch this morning, or I would be alone and asleep in my chair by now." Sylvia went into the kitchen and came back a minute later. "The pie isn't quite cool yet, but it will be soon." Around the table, everyone protested that they were too full to possibly eat anything, but Miles said, "What kind of pie?" "Pumpkin, and we made some homemade whipped cream for it." Everyone agreed that there might be one more small crevice where they would eventually be able to cram a piece of pumpkin pie. Then the conversation lagged for a moment. Not an uncomfortable silence, but a reflective moment for everyone. Isaac had an idea. He jumped up from the table and ran into the pantry, where he retrieved the bottle of brandy he had bought on impulse the day before. He only had 2 snifters, but he didn't think that mattered. He grabbed 6 other glasses and carried them back with them. He set a glass in front of each person, then poured a few fingers into each one. He decided to turn the tables on Eleanor after she had asked him to say grace. "Will you give us a toast then, Eleanor?" If he thought he might catch her off guard, he was mistaken. "May you live for as long as you want and never want for anything as long as you live. I wish health to those I love and wealth to those who love me." No one was going to top that, so there was a general clinking of glasses and small sips of the brandy around the table. "Do you think the pie is cool by now?" Miles asked, and for some reason that broke the spell that had settled over them. There were small titters of laughter, and the sisters went to the kitchen. They returned with the pie, the whipped cream, and 8 pie plates. They had been right. There's always room for a piece of delicious pie. When dessert was done, Miles stood up and said, "Since you ladies cooked, it's only right that the boys clean up." Bartholomew, Joey, Miles, and Isaac went into action. They scraped plates, put leftovers into small takeaway containers, loaded the dishwasher, and set the pots and pans to soak. They wiped down the counters, swept the floor, and left the kitchen almost as clean as when the day had started. The 4 women sat around the long table, sipping their brandy and talking. With everything done, a movie watched, a puzzle completed, a dinner made and eaten, and a kitchen clean, everybody seemed to realize that the gathering was complete. Without an announcement, everyone retrieved their coats and hats. Isaac was still concerned about Katie. He wanted to ask if she would be willing to stay in the guest room that night. "We hijacked your tree, didn't we?" I was just going to burn it to keep warm tonight. No worry about that now. Eleanor has asked me to stay with her. Isaac desperately wanted to ask, for tonight or, but he couldn't manage it. Eleanor took him off the hook. I've been looking for someone to stay with me and help out around the house. Isaac had no idea what that might entail as far as a salary or simply a place to stay, but he left the details to them. Knowing that Katie and Mushu would not be sleeping under a bridge that night was the best present of the day, in which there had been many. Isaac offered to walk home with everyone, but they assured him they could manage. Middle Falls had taken one of its typical turns. The weather had warmed, the falling snow had turned to rain, and most of the white stuff had been washed away. The seven of them left with promises to get together again like this soon. Mushu barked once in agreement, and then they were gone. Isaac had only just picked up his brandy again when the phone rang. Hello? You don't sound like you were sleeping, Sandra said, a little surprised. No, not today. Let me tell you a story. And that's it. A Christmas most unusual. It's not just a Christmas most unusual, but it's kind of a story most unusual. I've never written a story anything like that. If we think about it, not a lot happened. There wasn't any conflict really in the story. I wouldn't be able to tell you who the protagonist was. Was it Isaac? Was it Katie? Was it Mushu, as it often is? And so it was just when I write Christmas stories, I often go back to the kind of sweet and old-fashioned kind of stories that I suppose I grew up with. Something like that is just what feels needed at Christmas time. So that's my little Christmas present to you for 2024. Sorry I didn't get a new Christmas story out this year. Writing the last Middle Falls book, number 21, Reggie Blackwell, just took a lot out of me from a writing standpoint. And I just didn't have the impetus to get going on another Christmas story, but I'll have one for you next year. And I am planning on kind of writing a few short stories and sharing them here on the YouTube channel like this with you. So thanks a lot. Merry Christmas. I hope you have a wonderful season.